Most people think parchment paper is one of the safest things in the kitchen. You line your baking tray, wrap your food, slide it into the oven, and never question it for a second. After all, it's just paper, right? But here's the uncomfortable truth. Not all parchment paper is safe, and some of the most popular white parchment papers on the market may expose your food to chemicals you absolutely don't want anywhere near your body. The problem starts with how white parchment paper is made. To get that bright, clean look, many brands rely on heavy chemical bleaching, chlorine-based processes, and synthetic coatings. When these papers are exposed to high heat, those chemicals don't just disappear, they can migrate directly into your food. And the scary part, most people use parchment paper specifically for high-heat cooking, like baking, roasting, and air frying. So today, we're exposing parchment paper brands you should avoid at all costs. And then we'll reveal 2 trustworthy, genuinely safe alternatives that actually deliver what your body needs. I started with the 2 parchment papers I see everywhere in American kitchens. Not niche brands, not cheap imports. These are the defaults. The ones people grab without thinking. Brand number 1, Reynolds Kitchens Parchment Paper, and brand number 2, Kirkland Signature Parchment Paper from Costco. I've used Reynolds for years. It's sold in Walmart, Target, Amazon, almost every grocery aisle in the country. I pulled a fresh sheet from the box and ran it between my fingers. Smooth, bright white, almost clinical. That color isn't natural. To reach that uniform white, the paper goes through a bleaching process. Reynolds doesn't hide that it's food safe, but what's missing is detail. The paper is coated with silicone to make it non-stick, and the company lists a maximum oven temperature of 425 degrees Fahrenheit, about 218 degrees Celsius. That's the first crack in the "it's just paper" illusion, because parchment paper is rarely used at low heat. Baking bread, roasting vegetables, air frying chicken, those methods regularly push the paper right to its thermal edge. I tested it the same way most people use it, a tray of vegetables at 430 degrees Fahrenheit. The edges darkened first, then a faint odor, not burning, but something chemical and flat. According to U.S. food contact regulations under 21 CFR 176.170, paper materials are permitted for food use, but the regulation doesn't mean zero migration. It means acceptable limits under defined conditions. A 2016 peer-reviewed study documented that PDMS, a component of silicone coatings, can migrate from parchment paper into food during baking, especially when heat and fat are present. This isn't about instant toxicity. It's about repeated low-level exposure that no one tracks. Reynolds isn't breaking the law, but it also isn't giving consumers the transparency needed to use the product safely. Over time, that matters. Then there's Kirkland Signature Parchment Paper, Costco's private label version. The roll is massive. It feels like value, but value changes behavior. When you buy parchment in bulk, you use it more casually, more meals, more heat cycles. I measured how often it appeared in my own cooking. Once it became the cheap and endless option, easily 200 to 300 uses a year in an average household. The Kirkland paper is also bright white, also silicone coated, and offers very limited public information about coating grade or long-term heat stability. Costco assures customers the product is food safe, but safety isn't binary, it's cumulative. Here's the uncomfortable part. Even minimal chemical migration, when multiplied across hundreds of meals, stops being theoretical, especially with fatty foods, salmon, roasted nuts, pastries, because fats are efficient carriers. This isn't about fear, it's about exposure math. Neither Reynolds nor Kirkland will make you sick overnight, but both normalize a habit where a heat-sensitive, chemically processed material touches your food again and again, right at the edge of its limits. Stop treating parchment paper as inert. Avoid the white versions when possible. Respect the 425 degrees Fahrenheit ceiling instead of pushing past it. And most importantly, don't let familiarity replace scrutiny. When something sits this close to your food, silence isn't reassurance. It's a reason to look closer. After Reynolds and Kirkland, I moved on to brands that wear a different kind of armor. Not bulk, not legacy, image. These are the products people trust because they look responsible, softer language, earth tones, words like care, home, family. And that's exactly why they deserve closer inspection. Brand number 3, If You Care Parchment Paper, white version. Brand number 4, Glad Parchment Paper. I'll start with If You Care, because this one surprised me. The brand is widely sold across the United States, especially in health-focused grocery chains and online retailers. It positions itself as environmentally conscious, safer by default. Many consumers associate it with unbleached, chlorine-free paper, but the version I tested, the white parchment, tells a different story the moment you put it under heat. White paper, by definition, has been processed beyond its natural state. Even when a brand avoids elemental chlorine, bleaching is still a chemical intervention that alters fiber structure. I ran the If You Care white parchment through repeated baking cycles, first at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, then 425 degrees Fahrenheit, then a long roast at 440 degrees Fahrenheit. By the second cycle, the sheet felt brittle. The color darkened unevenly, especially where oil pooled. That's not just cosmetic. Fiber degradation under heat is a signal that the material is struggling to remain stable. The company does not publicly disclose the grade of silicone used for its non-stick coating, nor how that coating performs after multiple heat exposures. That lack of detail matters, because according to migration research, heat plus fat plus time is the exact combination that increases transfer risk from coated food contact materials. The deeper issue here isn't that If You Care is secretly dangerous. It's that clean branding lowers consumer defenses. When people believe a product is safe by philosophy, they stop checking temperature limits, stop rotating materials, stop questioning frequency of use. Exposure doesn't come from one bad meal, it comes from quiet repetition. And when a white version exists at all, it undermines the idea that aesthetics don't drive processing choices. Then there's Glad parchment paper, a name almost everyone in America recognizes. Glad is sold everywhere: big box stores, grocery chains, online. It benefits from brand familiarity built over decades. But familiarity isn't data. Glad's parchment paper is also bright white, also chemically processed, and marketed for a wide range of cooking methods: baking, roasting, even grilling. That's where the risk creeps in, because most parchment papers, regardless of brand, are designed to perform safely below 425 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Grilling environments and high-rack oven use often exceed that, especially at the edges. In my tests, Glad parchment browned quickly at the corners when used above 430 degrees Fahrenheit. At 450 degrees Fahrenheit, I noticed light smoke within minutes, not flames, but a warning sign: material stress. According to cooking safety data, visible browning or smoking at normal baking temperatures indicates the paper is operating outside its optimal range. When coatings degrade, they don't announce it. They just stop behaving predictably. What both of these brands have in common is not intent, but assumption. The assumption that if it's sold everywhere, it must be safe everywhere. The assumption that white means clean. The assumption that a non-stick surface is neutral under heat. None of those assumptions are guaranteed, and none of them are supported by transparent, brand-specific testing data available to the public. The risk wasn't always in what I could prove immediately. It was in what I couldn't see, what wasn't disclosed, what required trust without evidence. Brand number 5, Hearth and Hand parchment paper, sold exclusively through Target. Brand number 6, Chef's Planet parchment paper. These two don't dominate shelves because of history or bulk. I picked up Hearth and Hand first because private label products deserve extra scrutiny. When a retailer controls the brand, the supply chain details rarely sit in public view. The packaging looks calm, neutral colors, home-focused language. Nothing that suggests risk. The biggest concern raised around products like this isn't an immediate chemical smell or visible failure. It's PFAS. These so-called forever chemicals have historically been used to make paper resistant to grease and moisture. In 2024, the U.S. FDA announced that PFAS used as grease-proofing agents in food packaging had completed a voluntary phase-out in the United States. That sounds reassuring until you read the fine print. It means manufacturers agreed to stop selling those substances going forward. Across the Atlantic, the European Food Safety Authority set a tolerable weekly intake of 4.4 nanograms per kilogram of body weight per week for a group of key PFAS compounds. That number is small for a reason. PFAS accumulate. They don't clear quickly, and exposure rarely comes from one source. Cookware, packaging, water, food all add up. When a parchment paper brand does not clearly state no PFAS intentionally added, the question isn't accusation. I used the Hearth and Hand paper in repeated bakes between 400 degrees Fahrenheit and 445 degrees Fahrenheit. Performance was inconsistent. The paper felt thinner than expected. Edges curled faster. After longer cooks, the surface texture changed less slick, more fragile. That's not proof of PFAS, but it is proof that this material operates close to its tolerance, with no public data to back up its long-term stability. For something that touches food directly, that's a problem. Then there's Chef's Planet. This brand is harder to pin down. It appears online, marketed as premium, but with limited manufacturer information and no accessible certificates of analysis. When a product's digital footprint feels vague, I treat it as a warning. I tested it anyway. At 425 degrees Fahrenheit, it discolored faster than expected. At 440 degrees Fahrenheit, the sheet became brittle, tearing when lifted with food still on it. That matters. Tearing increases direct contact between food and the pan, encouraging higher oil use and more residue transfer. Neither of these brands needs to be proven toxic to be problematic. They only need to be used often enough without informed limits. That's how everyday risk works. Quietly, incrementally, hidden behind soft branding and incomplete answers. At this point in the investigation, one thing became undeniable. The safest-looking products were often the least transparent. And in a kitchen, transparency is not a luxury. It's the difference between conscious use and blind trust. Brand number 7, Aunt Millie's Parchment Paper. Brand number 8, Dixie Parchment Paper. These two sit on opposite ends of the clarity spectrum. One is difficult to verify at all. The other is widely misunderstood. And both reveal how easily consumers can be misled either by missing information or by oversimplified judgments. I'll start with Aunt Millie's because this was the most unsettling stop in the investigation. I tried to trace the brand the way any careful consumer would. Corporate site, manufacturer address, material specifications. Nothing solid surfaced. The name itself appears inconsistent across listings, and there is no clear connection to a well-documented U.S. food contact materials manufacturer. That alone is a red flag. The parchment paper itself told a similar story. It was bright white, thin, and unusually stiff out of the box. I tested it at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, then 400 degrees Fahrenheit, then 425 degrees Fahrenheit. At temperatures where parchment should remain stable, this paper browned rapidly at the edges. At 430 degrees Fahrenheit, it emitted visible smoke within minutes. That is not normal performance. Parchment paper is designed to tolerate high heat without scorching. When it fails early, it suggests aggressive processing, weak fiber integrity, or unstable coatings. There's also the durability issue. During a simple lift test removing baked food from a tray, the sheet tore in two places. Tearing matters. It increases direct contact between food and hot metal, which encourages higher oil use and increases the chance of residue sticking to the food. Ingesting paper fragments is unlikely to be dangerous in isolation, but repeated degradation is a sign of poor material quality. With no transparent sourcing, no disclosed oven-safe limit, and no independent testing available, the conclusion here is simple. Then there's Dixie. And this one required a different kind of honesty. Dixie is often grouped into the cheap and unsafe category, but that label doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Dixie manufactures multiple parchment and pan liner products for food service use in the United States. Some of those products are rated for oven temperatures up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Others are clearly labeled no PFAS added. That matters, because unlike vague consumer brands, food service suppliers are often required to meet stricter performance disclosures. The problem is that consumers rarely see the distinction. Not all Dixie parchment products are the same. Some are thin, retail-grade sheets intended for light baking. Others are heavy-duty liners designed for commercial kitchens running hundreds of cycles a week. When people buy the wrong version and push it past its intended use, say 450 degrees Fahrenheit, on a lightweight liner, they experience scorching, smoking, and failure. Then the entire brand gets blamed. This is where the original narrative falls apart. Dixie isn't inherently unsafe. Misuse is. And misuse thrives when people don't read specifications. A parchment rated for 425 degrees Fahrenheit is not interchangeable with one rated for 500 degrees Fahrenheit, even if the logo looks familiar. The real lesson in these last two brands isn't about good versus bad. It's about visibility. Aunt Millie's fails because it offers none. Dixie confuses because it offers many, and consumers don't know how to choose. In both cases, the risk doesn't come from a dramatic toxin. It comes from operating blind. After weeks of heat tests, packaging comparisons, regulatory documents, and more scorched sheet pans than I care to admit, I needed a reset. Not everything in the parchment paper aisle exists in a gray zone. This is where the investigation shifted from exposure to balance. Brand number 9, Paper Chef Unbleached Parchment Paper, and alongside it, a broader category worth understanding, verified unbleached parchment with clear heat limits and material disclosure. I started with Paper Chef, not because it claims perfection, but because it explains itself. That alone is rare. The first thing you notice is the color, light brown. natural, unbleached. That matters more than most people realize. Bleaching isn't just about appearance. It alters fiber structure, often making paper more fragile under heat. Unbleached fibers retain more of their natural integrity, which shows up when temperatures climb. Paper Chef openly states its maximum oven temperature, 425 degrees Fahrenheit. No vague, high heat-safe language. No marketing gymnastics. Just a number. I tested it repeatedly at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 415 degrees Fahrenheit, and right at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. The behavior was consistent. No early browning at the edges, no chemical odor, no sudden brittleness after extended cooks. With fatty foods, salmon, roasted nuts, pastries, the surface remained stable instead of collapsing where oils pooled. That's important because fat accelerates breakdown in weaker papers. The non-stick performance also held up without feeling artificially slick. That's usually a sign of a more controlled silicone application rather than an overloaded coating. According to migration research, transfer risk increases when coatings degrade under stress. Stability is what you want, not maximum slipperiness. Paper Chef also provides clear usage guidance, including warnings to avoid direct contact with heating elements or open flames, details many brands quietly omit. The second recommendation isn't a single logo, it's a set of criteria. Through this investigation, it became clear that safety doesn't come from branding, it comes from verification. Unbleached parchment papers that clearly state oven limits 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 450 degrees Fahrenheit, or higher, depending on construction and disclose coating intent, are consistently more predictable. Some food service grade parchments rated at 450 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit perform exceptionally well when used correctly. The key is that the rating is real, specific, and documented. It's cumulative. Fewer unknown residues, less breakdown under heat, reduced need for excess oil to prevent sticking. Over hundreds of meals a year, that reduction matters, not because any single sheet is dangerous, but because exposure adds up quietly when no one is paying attention. The most important shift here is psychological, moving from "this should be fine" to "this is designed for this exact use." When you choose unbleached parchment with clear specifications, you're not chasing purity, you're restoring proportion, you're reducing unnecessary variables in a kitchen already full of them. Most people use parchment paper the same way every time. Tear it, line the tray, push the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 450 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes higher. Let the edges curl toward the heating element. Let oil drip and pool. Let the paper darken, smoke slightly, and assume that's normal. It isn't. Those are stress signals. Material limits being tested in real time. If a paper's rated for 425 degrees Fahrenheit, treat that as a ceiling, not a suggestion. Going 25 degrees higher might not cause a fire, but it does accelerate breakdown. Repeated exposure above the limit matters more than a single mistake. Heat damage is cumulative, just like exposure. Placement matters too. Parchment should never touch the oven walls, broiler elements, or open flames. That's where temperatures spike unpredictably, often exceeding 500 degrees Fahrenheit in localized zones. I've measured it. That's when browning turns into charring, and charring turns into smoke. Smoke isn't just unpleasant, it's a sign that the material is no longer stable. Frequency matters more than people realize. If you're using parchment paper 4 or 5 times a week, that's over 200 direct food contact exposures per year. Even low-level migration repeated often enough becomes relevant. This is why rotating materials make sense. Glass bakeware, ceramic trays, reusable silicone mats rated for 500 degrees Fahrenheit or more. Not as replacements, but as balance. Another overlooked detail is fat. High-fat foods, bacon, salmon, pastries, nuts stress parchment paper more aggressively. Fat carries heat. Fat pulls compounds. When cooking those foods, material quality matters more, not less. That's when unbleached, stable parchment earns its place. And when cheap, thin paper fails first. The solution isn't to throw everything away, it's to slow down. Read the temperature rating. Choose unbleached when possible. Avoid brands that won't tell you how their product is made, and stop assuming that silence means safety. In consumer products, silence usually means unanswered questions. If this kind of investigation helps you see everyday products differently, stay with me. Share this with someone who cooks for their family. Ask better questions the next time you're standing in that aisle. Because once you start noticing where assumptions replace transparency, you don't just cook differently, you live differently.